The scent of warm cinnamon rolls and fresh bread filled the air as Margaret adjusted the open sign on the door of her small-town bakery. For over 30 years, she had poured her heart into this place, waking up before the sun to knead dough and greet customers with a kind smile. But lately things had changed. The mornings weren't just about flour and sugar anymore. They were about fear. It started a few weeks ago. A group of bikers rolled into town, their roaring engines echoing down the quiet streets. At first, they seemed like any other travelers passing through. But soon, they made their presence known in the worst way. They began showing up at Margaret's bakery, not for pastries or coffee but for something much darker. They wanted money, protection fees, they called it. If she didn't pay, they warned, her bakery might not be so lucky. Broken windows, stolen goods, the kind of trouble no elderly woman should have to face alone. Margaret tried to stand her ground. But what could she do? She was just one person. The police in town didn't seem too eager to take on a gang of rough-looking bikers. Day by day, her savings dwindled as she handed over cash just to keep her bakery safe. Each night, she sat alone in her small apartment above the shop, wondering how much longer she could hold on. But what the bikers didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that someone was coming home. Someone who would not stand for this. Miles away, a plane touched down on American soil. A young man stepped off, his uniform crisp, his boots still dusted with the sands of a place far from home. Logan had spent the last few years serving in the Navy, training, fighting, and protecting his country. And now, finally, he was back. There was only one thing he wanted more than anything: a warm hug from his grandmother and a bite of her famous apple pie. As he slung his bag over his shoulder and hailed a cab, he had no idea that trouble was waiting for him back home. No idea that his sweet, loving grandmother had been threatened. No idea that the bakery, the heart of their family, was at risk. Meanwhile, the bikers had grown bolder. That morning, as Margaret nervously handed over another envelope of cash, one of them sneered. "You're running out of time, lady. Business is looking slow. Maybe we should take a little more next time, huh?" She gripped the counter, her knuckles turning white. She had never felt so powerless in her life. But then, the bells above the bakery door jingled. The room fell silent. A familiar voice, calm yet firm, cut through the tension. "Grandma!" Margaret turned, her eyes widening as she saw him. Logan was home, and the look in his eyes said one thing. This was about to end. Logan set his bag down just inside the door, his sharp eyes scanning the scene in front of him. His grandmother stood behind the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched an envelope. Across from her, 3 men in worn leather jackets and heavy boots loomed over the display case, their presence thick with intimidation. Logan didn't know exactly what was happening, but one look at Margaret's face told him enough. Something was very, very wrong. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She had dreamed of this moment for months, counting the days until her grandson would come home. But not like this. Not with fear in her heart and dangerous men in her shop. She wanted to rush to him, to hold him close and tell him how much she had missed him. But the tension in the room held her still. One of the bikers, a tall man with a scruffy beard and a faded skull emblem on his jacket, smirked. "Well, well, who do we have here?" He looked Logan up and down, taking in the clean-cut military look, the squared shoulders, the quiet but undeniable strength. "You lost, soldier boy? This ain't a recruiting office." Logan didn't flinch. His years of training had taught him how to read a situation, and this one was clear. These men weren't just customers. They weren't here for coffee and pastries. He could see the way his grandmother clutched that envelope like it was her last bit of security. His jaw tightened. "I'm not lost," Logan said, his voice steady. "I'm home." The lead biker chuckled, glancing at his buddies. "That's so? Well, welcome home, kid. But your grandma and I were in the middle of a little business discussion. Maybe you should step outside while the grown-ups talk." Margaret found her voice. "Logan, honey, it's fine. They were just leaving." Her words were meant to calm him, but he could hear the fear behind them. She was trying to protect him, the same way she had when he was a little boy. Only now, it was his turn to protect her. Logan's gaze locked onto the envelope. "What's in that?" Margaret hesitated. The lead biker sighed, clearly growing impatient. "Lady, we don't have all day. Hand it over, and we'll be on our way." Logan stepped forward, placing himself between the men and his grandmother. "She's not giving you anything." A thick silence filled the shop. The other two bikers shifted slightly, their expressions hardening. The lead man tilted his head, his smirk fading. "Kid," he said, his voice dropping a notch, "I don't think you understand how this works." Logan's stare didn't waver. "No, I don't think you understand." Margaret could feel her heart pounding. This was getting dangerous. She had spent weeks fearing what these men could do, and now Logan was standing right in the middle of it. The lead biker studied him for a long moment, then let out a low chuckle. "You got guts, I'll give you that," he said. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached into his pocket. Margaret gasped, but Logan didn't move. He just watched, calculating, waiting. The biker pulled out a single toothpick and stuck it between his teeth. He grinned. "See you around, kid." Then he turned, motioning for his men to follow. The bells above the door jingled again as the bikers stepped out onto the street. Logan stayed where he was, his muscles tense, his mind racing. Margaret let out a shaky breath, placing a hand on his arm. "Logan, you don't know what you just got yourself into." Logan looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "Neither do they," he said quietly. Outside, the bikers stood by their motorcycles, talking in hushed voices. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, the bakery felt different. The warm glow of the lights and the comforting scent of fresh bread should have made Logan feel at home. But instead, there was an unease in the air. Margaret moved around the kitchen, kneading dough with hands that weren't as steady as they used to be. Logan sat at the small wooden table, watching her in silence. She had tried to downplay everything after the bikers left, telling him it was just some business trouble and that she didn't want him to worry. But Logan knew better. The way her voice shook, the way she kept glancing at the front door, as if expecting someone to barge in, it told him everything he needed to know. "How long has this been going on?" he finally asked. Margaret hesitated, sighing as she dusted flour off her hands. "A few weeks. They came in one day, acting friendly at first. Said they were part of a local protection group, helping businesses stay safe. I didn't know what they meant at first, but then they started coming back, demanding money." She shook her head. "At first, it was just a little, but then they kept asking for more. And when I didn't have enough, they said accidents could happen." Logan clenched his jaw. He had spent years defending his country, standing up against threats most people would never have to face. But now, the battle was right here at home. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "I didn't want to tell you. You just got back, Logan. You've been through enough. I didn't want you stepping into this mess." He looked at her, his expression softening. "Grandma, this is my home too. And I'm not letting them do this to you." Margaret sighed, sitting across from him. "The thing is, I'm not the only one. They've been going to other small businesses too. Mr. Jenkins at the hardware store, Maria at the diner, even the florist down the street. We've all been too scared to do anything. If we call the police, they just get warned and come back angry." Logan frowned. "The police know about this?" She nodded. "Some do, but nothing changes. Either they're scared or they don't care." That only made Logan's resolve stronger. He wasn't the kind of man to sit back and let fear control his family, his town. He needed to figure out exactly who these men were and what their real goal was. Meanwhile, outside in the quiet streets, the bikers weren't done talking about him. Parked in a dimly lit alley, the leader of the group, Vince, leaned against his motorcycle, deep in thought. One of his men, a younger guy with a scar across his cheek, shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, that soldier kid, he's gonna be trouble." Vince exhaled slowly, rolling the toothpick between his fingers. "Yeah," he muttered. "I figured that out the second I saw him." The others waited for him to say more. Vince wasn't stupid. He knew a trained fighter when he saw one. Logan wasn't just some kid fresh out of boot camp. The way he stood, the way he didn't flinch when they tried to intimidate him, it meant he had seen real action. "Should we handle it?" another man asked. Vince gave him a sharp look. "Not yet. We don't need that kind of attention. But keep an eye on him. If he starts getting in our way," he let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. Back at the bakery, Logan lay awake in his old bedroom, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced, thinking through every possible way to stop these guys. He had dealt with worse situations before, but this was different. These weren't enemy combatants overseas. These were people who thought they could take advantage of hardworking folks like his grandmother. He turned his head toward the window, watching the street below. The town he had always known, the one he had grown up in, felt like it was under siege. But what the bikers didn't understand, what they would soon find out, was that Logan had never backed down from a fight. And he wasn't about to start now. The next morning, Logan woke up early, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He could hear his grandmother downstairs, already busy in the bakery. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries filled the air, but today, it wasn't comforting. It only reminded him of the danger she was in. As he stepped into the kitchen, Margaret glanced up from the counter. "Didn't expect you up so early," she said softly. "Couldn't sleep," Logan admitted. He poured himself a cup of coffee, his mind still working through his next move. "Has anyone else been by? Any trouble?" Margaret shook her head. "Not yet, but they always come back." She hesitated, then sighed. "Logan, I know you want to help, but please, don't do anything that'll make this worse." Logan met her gaze. "Grandma, they're already making it worse." He had to act fast. If the police weren't going to help, he had to find another way to stop these guys before they hurt someone. And the first step was figuring out exactly what they were up to. Later that day, Logan made his way to the hardware store. Mr. Jenkins, an older man with a stiff gait and tired eyes, was restocking shelves when he spotted Logan walking in. He gave a small nod. "Heard you were back." Logan nodded in return. "Yeah, and I heard you've been having some trouble." The older man sighed, glancing toward the front window as if making sure no one was watching. "You don't want to get mixed up in this, son." "I think I already am." Jenkins hesitated, then leaned in. "They've been squeezing everyone they can. The diner, the flower shop, even the gas station. Every week, they come for their cut. And if someone doesn't pay," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Last week, Maria's delivery truck was vandalized. Before that, my back window got smashed in. We all know it was them, but there's no proof." Logan frowned. This wasn't just about intimidation, this was control. They were trying to own this town piece by piece. But why? Where do they go when they're not making threats? Logan asked. Jenkins lowered his voice. "There's an old garage near the edge of town. They use it as a clubhouse, but I've seen them hauling things in and out at odd hours. I don't know what they're up to, but it's not just about bullying shop owners." That was all Logan needed to hear. He had to see it for himself. That night, he drove out toward the garage, parking his truck a safe distance away. The building was dimly lit, with a few motorcycles lined up outside. He crept closer, careful to stay in the shadows. As he neared the side of the building, he heard voices, low, serious. "Shipment comes in tomorrow. We move it fast, no mistakes." Logan's eyes narrowed. Shipment? This wasn't just about extortion. These guys were running something bigger. Just as he tried to get a better look, a boot scuffed against the gravel behind him. Logan turned, heart pounding, just as a rough voice growled, "Wrong place, soldier boy." Logan barely had time to react before a heavy hand grabbed the back of his jacket and shoved him forward. He stumbled but caught himself, spinning around to face the man who had caught him. It was one of the bikers from the bakery, the younger one with the scar across his cheek. His smirk was laced with amusement, but his stance told Logan he was ready for a fight. "Didn't think we'd notice you sneaking around," the man said, cracking his knuckles. "You made a real bad choice coming here alone, soldier." Logan's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression calm. He'd been in worse situations before. "Just out for a walk," he said casually. "Didn't realize this was private property." Scarface chuckled, but the amusement didn't reach his eyes. "Nice try. But see, we don't take kindly to nosy people. And you? You're starting to be a problem." Logan tensed as footsteps approached from the side. Another man stepped out of the shadows. A taller, bulkier biker with arms covered in tattoos. Vince, the leader. "You should have stayed out of this," Vince said, voice calm but firm. "Your grandma, the bakery, all of it, it was just business. But now..." He tilted his head. "Now you're making this personal." Logan held his ground. "Maybe it was personal the second you threatened my grandmother." Vince sighed, shaking his head like he was disappointed. "I was hoping we wouldn't have to do this the hard way." He nodded toward Scarface. "Teach him a lesson." Scarface lunged, throwing a punch aimed at Logan's ribs. But Logan had been trained for moments like this. He sidestepped just in time, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it sharply. Scarface grunted in pain. But before Logan could fully take him down, the bigger man moved in fast. A hard punch caught Logan in the side, knocking the breath from his lungs. He stumbled but recovered quickly, raising his fists. The fight was uneven, 2 against 1, but he wasn't about to back down. Scarface came at him again, this time swinging wild. Logan ducked, driving his shoulder into the man's stomach and slamming him into the side of the building. Scarface groaned, sliding to the ground. But the momentary victory cost him. Vince was already behind him. A sharp blow to the back sent Logan to his knees. His vision blurred for a second, and he tasted blood. Before he could get back up, strong hands grabbed his arms, yanking them behind his back. "You're tougher than you look," Vince said, standing over him. "But you're not invincible." Logan struggled, but the grip on his arms was too tight. Vince crouched down, lowering his voice. "See, you don't understand what we're really doing here. And that makes you dangerous. But don't worry, we've got a way of handling problems like you." Logan's breathing was heavy, his mind racing. He had to find a way out of this. Then, from somewhere in the distance, the unmistakable sound of an approaching car. Headlights cut through the darkness, and Vince cursed under his breath. The momentary distraction was all Logan needed. With one swift motion, he twisted his body, wrenching himself free from the biker holding him. He rolled to his feet just as the car screeched to a stop nearby. The driver's side door flew open. And stepping out, to Logan's complete shock, was Maria, the diner owner. "Get in," she shouted. Logan didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the car as the bikers lunged after him. Scarface reached for him, but Logan was faster. He dove into the passenger seat just as Maria hit the gas. The tires screeched as they sped away. Logan turned to look at her, still catching his breath. "What the hell are you doing here?" Maria's grip on the wheel was tight, her face set with determination. "Saving your life," she said. "And we don't have much time." Logan frowned. "Time for what?" She looked at him, her eyes dark with urgency. "To stop whatever they're planning, because it's bigger than just extortion." Logan felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Whatever was happening in this town, it was worse than he thought. Logan's heart pounded as Maria sped through the quiet streets, the glow of streetlights flashing past them. He kept glancing in the side mirror, half expecting the bikers to be right behind them. But for now, they were in the clear. "Start talking," Logan said, his voice tight. "What do you know?" Maria's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "It's not just extortion, Logan. They're moving something illegal. Drugs, weapons, I don't know. But I heard them talking in the diner a few nights ago. They're expecting a shipment tonight at the docks. A big one." Logan's jaw clenched. That explained the bikers' stronghold on the town. The threats, the fear, the intimidation. It was all a cover for something bigger. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked. Maria shot him a look. "Who was I supposed to tell? The cops? Half of them look the other way. And the ones who don't? They're too scared to do anything." Logan exhaled sharply. He knew corruption ran deep in some places, but seeing it so close to home made his blood boil. "We have to stop that shipment," Maria said, turning onto a back road. Logan nodded. "Take me there." 15 minutes later, they pulled up near the docks, keeping the car hidden behind a stack of abandoned shipping containers. The air smelled like salt water and gasoline. The place was quiet, but not for long. Logan spotted movement near a warehouse entrance. A few bikers stood guard, and beyond them, he could see headlights approaching from the far end of the pier. "This is it," he muttered. Maria swallowed hard. "What's the plan?" Logan flexed his fingers. "I'm gonna make sure that shipment doesn't go anywhere." Maria grabbed his arm before he could move. "Logan, these guys don't play fair." He gave her a reassuring look. "Neither do I." Sticking to the shadows, Logan moved swiftly along the containers, getting closer to the warehouse. The truck was pulling in now, and Vince was already waiting. The back doors of the truck swung open, and Logan caught a glimpse of what was inside, crates stacked high. Whatever was in them, it wasn't good. One of the bikers pulled out his phone. "Yeah, tell the boss we're clear." "No problems." Logan smiled to himself. That was about to change. He slipped around to the back of the warehouse, spotting an old metal ladder leading up to the roof. He climbed it quietly, positioning himself above the scene. From here, he had the perfect vantage point. Down below, Vince was inspecting the crates. "Let's move fast. We don't need any surprises." Logan smirked. Too late for that. Without hesitation, he kicked a loose metal panel, sending it crashing down onto a stack of crates. The noise startled the bikers, and in the split second of confusion, Logan dropped down, landing hard. Before anyone could react, he swung, knocking out the nearest man with a quick punch. Another rushed at him, but Logan ducked, using his attacker's momentum to slam him against a crate. "Get him!" Vince shouted. Logan fought hard, dodging blows, countering with precision. But there were too many of them. A heavy fist caught him across the jaw, sending him staggering. And then, the wail of sirens. Flashing red and blue lights flooded the dock as several police cars screeched to a stop. Officers stormed in, guns drawn. The bikers panicked, some trying to flee, others freezing in place. Vince turned, rage flashing in his eyes. "You set me up," he growled. Logan wiped blood from his lip, breathing heavily. "No, Vince. You set yourself up." Then, to Vince's shock, Maria stepped forward, alongside the town's police chief. "You've been running this town for too long," Maria said, her voice steady. "It's over." The officers moved fast, cuffing the bikers one by one. Vince tried to make a break for it, but Logan grabbed him, slamming him against the truck. "Where do you think you're going?" Vince struggled, but he knew it was useless. As the police secured the scene, Maria walked up to Logan. "How did you know they'd actually show up this time?" Logan exhaled. "Because not everyone in this town is scared." He looked toward the police chief. "And some people still believe in doing the right thing." Maria nodded, a small smile breaking through. As Vince and his crew were loaded into police cars, Logan looked around at the docks, at the town he had grown up in. The battle was over. But he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't going anywhere. This was home, and no one was going to take it away again. As the last of the police cars pulled away, taking Vince and his crew with them, the docks finally fell silent. The tension that had gripped the town for so long was starting to lift, replaced by something that had been missing for too long: relief. Logan stood near Maria, watching as officers secured the remaining evidence. The crates were being opened, revealing stacks of illegal goods, drugs, stolen electronics, and counterfeit cash. This wasn't just some small-time extortion ring. Vince had been part of something much bigger. Maria let out a long breath. "It's finally over," she said, shaking her head. "I can't believe it." Logan nodded, but his mind was still racing. He had spent years fighting in war zones, but he never expected to come home and find a battle waiting for him. He turned to Maria. "You really risked everything coming out here," he said. She gave him a small smile. "I wasn't about to let you take on all of them alone." Then her smile faded. "But Logan, what if there are more of them? What if this doesn't end with Vince?" Logan considered that. It was true, Vince was just one piece of a larger operation. But he also knew that when people stood together, when they stopped living in fear, they could take back what was theirs. "Then we stay ready," he said. "We make sure this town never falls into the wrong hands again." Maria nodded, as if accepting that this fight wasn't just his, it belonged to all of them. By the time Logan returned to the bakery, dawn was starting to break. The soft golden light spilled onto the quiet streets, casting long shadows. As he pushed open the door, the familiar scent of fresh bread and coffee wrapped around him like a warm embrace. Margaret looked up from the counter, relief flooding her face. "Logan," she breathed. "You're okay?" He smiled, stepping forward to hug her. "Yeah, Grandma. I'm okay." She pulled back, searching his face. "Is it over?" Logan nodded. "Vince and his crew are done. The police have enough on them to make sure they don't come back." Margaret exhaled, her shoulders finally relaxing. "I was so afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that no one would stop them. That this town would keep suffering." Logan squeezed her hand. "Not anymore." A few moments later, the bakery door opened, and to Logan's surprise, people from the town started filtering in. Maria, Mr. Jenkins, the florist from down the street, even the gas station owner. They all had the same look on their faces. A quiet determination, a sense of unity that hadn't been there before. Jenkins stepped forward first, nodding at Logan. "Heard what you did," he said. "Heard what both of you did." He looked at Margaret. I think it's about time we start looking out for each other again. Margaret smiled, her eyes misty. That's how it used to be. Maria glanced at Logan. Maybe it's how it should be again. Logan looked around the room, seeing people who had lived in fear for too long. But now there was hope. He had come back expecting to find home just as he had left it. Instead, he found a town in trouble, a fight he hadn't expected. But in the end, he also found something more, people willing to stand together, to protect what mattered. As the morning sun rose higher, the bakery came alive again. People sat at tables, talking, laughing. The fear that had once loomed over them was gone. And Logan knew without a doubt that this was where he belonged.